Welcome back, astronomers of Doctor Who fandom. So, we're continuing our analysis of how Doctor Who has depicted our solar system throughout its televised history. And now we are moving forwards in time. We're leaving the 1960s behind us, and with it the anticipation of first men landing on the moon, and now we enter the sexy 70s.
Everybody listen, we're part of the solar system.
No! I imagine that, with the Third Doctor era being as heavily Earth-based as it is, one would assume that there'd be relatively little solar system lore to speak of in the early 70s, but surprisingly this period of the show is a goldmine. Whoops. Hell, Spearhead from Space, the opening story of the decade, kicks off with an establishing shot of the Earth from space, prior to the Nestine meteorite's arrival. It's a pretty beautiful looking representation as well, I must say. What a breathtaking way to welcome the show into colour. But anyway, things get really interesting with Doctor Who and the Silurians. The story concerns underground sleepy lizards who dominated Earth millennia prior to humanity's evolution, but they had retreated to subterranean cryogenic cities when their astronomers witnessed the approach of another planet.
A small planet was approaching the world. We calculated that it would draw off our atmosphere, destroying all life.
But either way, the worst case scenario didn't occur as the rogue planet was instead caught by Earth's gravity and became the moon.
But don't you see that small planet was drawn into the Earth's orbit and became the moon? Your catastrophe never happened.
This is honestly an interesting relic of the past, as, back during this story's conception and writing process, this is genuinely the scientific community's most agreed upon hypothesis for how the moon came to be. However, by the mid-70s, an alternate scenario that the moon was formed from ejected collisional material after a great impact upon the Earth started to gain more popularity, and a decade later it had usurped the capture theory as the most favoured and scientifically supported explanation. Still, despite this shift in real-world scientific analyses, future Silurian stories maintain the less likely narrative that the moon was caught by Earth's gravity. The Ambassadors of Death continued riding the excitement of space exploration that was threaded throughout the late 60s, as it very optimistically features manned missions to Mars in the present day of the Third Doctor era. Whether that's in the 1970s or the 1980s is a whole other debate, thanks for that Mordred Undead. But either way, the point is humanity didn't just stop at the moon in the waning years of the 20th century. The revival would later shrug this off. Mars Probe 6 had previously touched down on the Martian surface, and the crew had encountered mysterious aliens who accidentally killed one of the astronauts because they didn't realise their touch was fatal.
So that's when you met them? When you were on a previous Mars probe?
Yes. They killed Jim. Jim Daniels, fellow astronaut, simply by touching him.
So they didn't know that their touch would kill human beings?
The other astronaut turned army general on the mission, George Carrington, took their intentions to be hostile and conspired to convince the world of their threat and make a preemptive attack on their ship. The aliens later harmlessly subdued and replaced the crew of the next human mission, Mars Probe 7, with ambassadors of their own species, and after a tense 8-month radio-silent wait,
we shall know the answer to the question that has been occupying the minds of everyone here at Space Control since Mars Probe 7 took off on its return journey from the Red Planet nearly 8 months ago.
And a rendezvous with a recovery craft, Mars Probe 7 finally returned to Earth with its alien passengers in tow. After Carrington kidnaps the ambassadors and takes advantage of them to stir up drama, the Doctor himself flies back out to the recovery craft to locate the real astronauts, ultimately ending up on the alien spaceship and finding out the truth directly from the horse's mouth. And then once Carrington's little scheme is foiled by the end, the ambassadors are traded back to their kin in exchange for the aforementioned astronauts. Whew, that was a mouthful. I really appreciate the detail of Mars Probe 7 being radio silent for 8 whole months, since in the real world that's roughly the same amount of time it takes for spacecraft to traverse the distance between Earth and Mars, so it's a logical assumption that the probe had been returning from Mars for all of that time. This hyperanalysis probably comes off as very obsessive and sad, doesn't it? The story also makes brief reference to a solar flare buildup.
Athens have reported a solar flare buildup.
So, hey, that's even more solar system phenomenon to cross off the list. And in Inferno, the Doctor sings a charming little melody about Martian moons.
Shine on, Martian moon. Who's up in the sky?
Ding ding ding! And that, ladies, gentlemen, and variations thereupon, is the first season to have a solar system reference in all of its stories. A very fulfilling feeling, isn't it? Anyway, let's move on. Well, after that, this era does dial it back to a couple of scant references for a bit. Unit uses code names based on the planets in the Mind of Evil.
Jupiter to Venus. Jupiter to Venus. Give us your position. I say again, give us your position. Over.
The Axon ship is seen flying nearby Earth in the Claws of Axos. In Colony in Space, the Master explains to the Doctor how exactly this superweapon he's found works, claiming that he could force Earth's sun through its remaining lifespan instantaneously with it.
One day, that sun will burn through to its core and explode. With this weapon, I could make that happen now.
That's unbelievable.
And in Day of the Daleks, we get an atmospheric glimpse of the moon. But then we hit another juicy story for solar system lore. The Curse of Peladon. You see, there's this galactic federation called, the Galactic Federation, established to ensure peaceful relations throughout a multitude of interplanetary civilizations, and both the worlds of Earth and Mars were simultaneously member states of this union. In terms of chairman delegates for group meetings, Earth was naturally represented by us humans, or rather it usually was, as in this particular story the Doctor fakes his way into the position with no negative repercussions, while the world of Mars was represented by our big shelly lizards, the Ice Warriors, who had, by this point, renounced their warmongering ways and strived to become a more cooperative force.
But the Doctor did say you were a race of warriors.
We were once, but now we reject violence, except in self-defense.
They clearly still suffer from their bloody reputation though, as during the embassy to welcome the primitive planet Peladon into their federation, some religious wacko and one of the other delegates, Arcturus, the latter with whom the Ice Warriors claim they had ancient beef with,
Mars and the world of Arcturus are old enemies,
conspire to sabotage the process via superstition and anonymous murder attempts, and in the process try framing the poor Martians for it all. Leave my reptile boys alone, they're reformed, you guys! Well, in any event, it doesn't work, and the embassy is a success, so hooray for our solar system making friends across the stars. Speaking of venturing across the stars, the Mutants depicts that Earth has an empire by the 30th century, with humanity having colonised extrasolar planets after having plundered their own solar system of resources.
Yes, great colonists, Earthmen, you know, Joe. Once they'd sacked the solar system, they moved on to pastures new.
Which unfortunately sounds like a genuinely real possibility for our greedy-ass species when we do genuinely get men beyond the moon. Sad that. But speaking of the moon, Frontier in Space, among the many other juicy snippets of world building it contributes, you know, in between the prison cells, establishes that felons under the jurisdiction of the 26th century Earth Empire are sent to the lunar penal colony.
Under the powers invested in me by the Special Security Act, I'm sending you to the lunar penal colony.
And the Doctor himself ends up there when Earth officials stubbornly refuse to believe that he's not a draconian spy. But it's okay because the Master turns up and busts him out. Can I just say that this subplot gets my nerdy space-loving eyes twinkling? Hell, the whole story does. Oh, and also there's luxury space cruisers between Venus and Mars.
Job on one of those luxury space liners. First officer on the Mars-Venus cruise, that'd suit me.
To think there are people out there who genuinely don't like this story. How does it feel to be wrong all the time? Does it hurt? Are you laughed at in the streets? Anyway, the follow-up, Planet of the Daleks, ends with Joe, having gone through a total emotional rollercoaster after the events of the last two stories, simply wanting to return home to Earth, and we even see it on the scanner during this beautiful little character moment. Lovely. In The Time Warrior, Commander Lynx lands on Earth and claims it, its moons, and its satellites in the glory of the Sontaran Empire, with this cute little flag.
I hereby claim this planet, its moons and satellites, for the greater glory of the Sontaran Empire.
So yeah, since the Sontaran Experiment later specifies that this story takes place in the 13th century, that means the Earth and the Moon have both been property of the Sontaran Empire ever since the Middle Ages. How about that? The Monster of Peladon has a similar setup to the Curse of Peladon, with Earth and Mars being part of the Galactic Federation and representatives from both being on Peladon and stuff, except this time the Ice Warriors are bad again. That's all there really is to say about it. They just took the same premise from before and inverted it. Meh. And in Planet of the Spiders, Jo flippantly remarks about the Doctor making day trips to Mars in her letter to Unit HQ.
So, Doctor, if you're away on a cheap day trip to Mars...
Now I know what you're thinking, but Will, aren't you missing something important? Like a defining aspect of the Third Doctor's personality? I had not forgotten, my dear viewers. I was merely saving it for a montage to round off the Third Doctor era. So without further ado...
Venusian karate. Hold it long enough, and the subject remains permanently paralyzed. Venusian karate.
Let him go! I will turn to Axos anyone else with you.
The first line of an old Venusian lullaby. Roughly translated, it goes, "Close your eyes, my darling." Well, 3 of them at least. Haroon, Haroon, Haroon. Well, I must say you seem quite partial to old Venusian lullabies. Haroon, Haroon, Haroon.
I see, Doctor, you're not going to disappear to Venus or anywhere like that, are you? Says the TARDIS is only a foot away.
Well, that's Venusian feet.
Oh, they're larger than ours.
Oh, yeah, much larger. Always tripping over themselves, the Venusians.
16.39 miles away.
So that's Venusian miles. If the Thraskin puts his fingers in his ears, it is polite to shout. That's an old Venusian proverb.
What's Thraskin?
Oh, it's an archaic word, seldom used since the 25th dynasty. The modern equivalent is plinge.
What does plinge mean?
Oh, for heaven's sake, Joe, I've just told you. It means Thraskin.
When he comes in, you can use your Venusian karate.
Venusian Aikido, gentlemen. I do hope I haven't hurt you. The moral of the story, of course, is never trust the Venusian Shanghorn with a Perigosto stick. Brigadier.
You better start overpowering me, hadn't you? You know a bit of your Venusian Uja?
Tell me, you ever tried Venusian hopscotch? Haroon, Haroon, Haroon. Oh dear, this is getting monotonous.
So now, on to the Fourth Doctor. In Robot, while turning out his pockets, the Doctor casually remarks his ownership of a pilot's license for the Mars-Venus rocket run.
Pilot's license for the Mars-Venus rocket run?
Whether he earned that license himself or procured it from someone else's possession is anyone's guess. The following story, The Ark in Space, opens with the Doctor and Sarah trying to take Harry on a trip to the moon.
A little trip to the moon, you said, just to prove to Harry.
Well, I didn't expect him to start messing about with the Helmick regulator.
But instead they end up on a cryogenic spaceship in orbit around the Earth in the very distant future. At some point, solar flares began ravaging the Earth's surface and destroying all life.
The solar flares destroyed all life on Earth.
Ah. Solar flares, I see.
So, humanity did a little eugenics and sent up a select gene pool of people on a station called Space Station Nerva to ensure the species' continued survival in its, purest form.
Our genetic pool has been balanced, cross-matched, compact evaluated. 3 random units could threaten our survival.
A bit yikes, but that's humanity for you.
It may be irrational of me, but human beings are quite my favourite species.
Wow, Doctor, I can't believe you have a problematic fave. Well, either way, giant space bugs called the Wirren are drawn to Nerva like moths to a flame because it turns out humans make good sex objects for their proto-xenomorph shtick. Kinky? The Sontaran Experiment follows on from this and actually shows us what has happened to Earth in the centuries since the solar flares and sunbursts. It's basically large overgrown fields and cliffs as far as the eye can see. So that's a thing. Both Mars and Venusians get name-checked in Genesis of the Daleks when the Doctor is discussing all prior defeats of the Daleks under duress.
Magnetic properties of the Earth were too. The Daleks were defeated by a virus that attacked the insulation on the cables in their electrical systems. The Venusians, in the space year 17,000, was halted by the intervention of a fleet of war rockets from the planet Hyperon.
Now, say what you want about the narrative quality of Revenge of the Cybermen, but in terms of solar system lore, it does give us a lot of meat to chew on. It takes place thousands of years in the past relative to the arc in space.
So this is before the time of the solar flares, when the Earth was evacuated.
Thousands of years before, Harry.
As we see that Space Station Nerva was originally a beacon prior to its function as a cryogenics store, and we know from the arc in space that Nerva was constructed sometime around the 29th or 30th century, so hey, how about that? That said, I'm not exactly sure why the creative decision was taken to explicitly set Revenge of the Cybermen in Nerva's past, rather than have the events of the story take place in Nerva's chronological future, but whatever. Anyway, the beacon was sent into the outer solar system to monitor the asteroid, or planet depending who you ask.
Ship has this new asteroid on its star chart. Planet of gold.
New Phobos, later renamed to Voga. Centuries before, Voga was instrumental in turning the tide in humanity's favour during the Cyber Wars, as it was there where they discovered the Cybermen's crippling weakness to gold.
Because of Voga and its gold. If humans had not had the resources of Voga, the Cyber War would have ended in glorious triumph.
As Voga is pretty much entirely comprised of the substance. So humanity invented the glitter gun and nearly wiped out the entire cyber race. I just want to briefly interject here and say that this is one of the absolute dumbest additions to Cybermen lore, and I hate it. But anyway, moving on. 50 years prior to the on-screen events of the story, Voga entered our solar system and became captured by the gravity of Jupiter.
It was first detected in our system 50 years ago and it was captured by Jupiter.
Becoming one of its new moons and bringing the total number of its satellites to a staggering 13.
Jupiter? I thought Jupiter had already been thoroughly studied. Yes, he's interested in its new satellite.
What do you mean there are now 13?
Yeah, our exploration and observation of the Jovian system was still considerably primitive when this story was written and broadcast, so they weren't to know that in actual fact there was 80 and counting as of 2022. Well, it turns out there's still a few Cybermen out there, and they want revenge on Voga. You know, revenge, that human emotion that previous Cybermen stories insisted that they had purged from themselves. Well, they siege Nerva Beacon, take the Doctor and some side characters prisoner, strap them with bombs, and send them on a kamikaze mission to the heart of Voga to ensure its total destruction. But then that doesn't work, so instead they settle for making the beacon itself smash into the Golden World, which also doesn't work. Also, Voga is populated by weird Easter Island-looking dudes who don't really add anything to the narrative. And to quickly cover any loose ends, there are apparently flights between Earth and Pluto, and the Cybermen have plans of conquering the entire solar system and handing it over to some guy that they're being double-crossed by.
Kalman wants power. He will be ruler of this solar system when we have conquered it.
Well, that was a wild ride. Anyway, time for Pyramids of Mars, the story where a destructive god called Sutekh is trapped inside a pyramid in Egypt, but he's prevented from escaping or even moving thanks to a force field, which is controlled by a power source inside another pyramid on Mars.
Force field? Controlled from a power source on Mars?
Mars?
Yes. That's where the signal was beamed from, remember?
I don't know whether to think that state of affairs is well constructed or just arbitrary. Well, Sutekh ends up being able to possess an Egyptologist to do his dirty work, which involves constructing robotic mummies to build a rocket aimed for the Pyramid of Mars. But when that doesn't work, he possesses the Doctor to take the Egyptologist to Mars in the TARDIS. Wow, finally! The show spent all these years talking and fantasizing about Mars, and now we actually get to go there, and it's a bunch of corridors with easily solvable puzzles. Well, Sutekh is able to destroy the power source through the Egyptologist, but because of the time it takes radio waves to traverse the vast distances between the planets, the Doctor is able to quickly rig up a temporal trap.
You're caught in a temporal trap, Sutekh.
I guess that's a pretty neat solution. I do like when the show remembers aspects of physics like that. Oh, and also at one point, the Doctor and Sarah take a peek at an alternate future where Sutekh wins, and not only is Earth completely decimated here, but the Doctor also describes the Sun as being dead.
That's the world as Sutekh would leave it. Desolate planet circling a dead sun.
That is one powerful Egyptian god. 2 years prior to the on-screen events of the android invasion, Guy Crayford was a senior astronaut aboard the first test of the XK-5 space freighter. But the mission ended in a note of muted disaster when he and his ship just vanished in deep space without a trace. Mission Control assumed the worst, that he had hit an asteroid.
Crayford was out in space, deep space, and then they lost him. His ship just vanished. They thought it hit an asteroid.
But in actuality, he had been abducted and brainwashed by the Kralls and taken to their home planet to formulate their Earth invasion plan. In the present day of the adventure, the plan is ready and about to be kicked into action, with the brainwashed Crayford getting back into contact with Mission Control and telling them a hoax story that a stabilizer failure had sent him into orbit around Jupiter, which they apparently buy.
They know about the stabilizer failure that sent me into orbit around Jupiter.
Gigantic hoax.
Exactly, Doctor, yes.
I suppose you could consider that fake solar system lore? Well, I mean, this whole video series is because, you know, Doctor Who isn't real, but shut up, you know what I mean. Either way, Mission Control says that he's been deeper into space than any other human being, so canonically in the 70s and or 80s unit timeline, space missions have sent humans to Mars, but never purposefully into the outer solar system. Cool to know. The Masque of Mandragora contains a fair amount of astrology, the superstitious study of how celestial bodies and their movements across our skies have an effect on humanity. Venus, Saturn, and Mars in particular are brought up as hypothetical topics here.
When Mars comes into conjunction with Saturn in the 7th layer in the House of the Ram, what does it signify? When Venus is in opposition to Saturn.
While the moon serves as the ticking clock of the climax, since Mandragora plans to encompass the Earth within its power when Mandragora swallows the moon, which the Doctor clarifies to be a lunar eclipse. And we even get to see it as well. Lovely. During Leela's time on the show, we get an interesting uptick on solar system locations and events. For instance, the Rutan Scout in Horror of Fang Rock claims that, despite having monitored all the other planets in the solar system, only Earth suits their purpose for launching a final strategic attack on the Sontaran Empire.
We scouted all the planets of this solar system. Only this one suits our purpose.
Which I guess makes sense. The Rutans are amphibious and we do have plenty of water after all. Meanwhile, the invisible enemy takes place on one of either two locations set very specifically within our solar system in the year 5000. The first is a human base on Titan, Saturn's largest moon, where a microscopic parasite called the Swarm infects the crew and prepares to turn the base into a hive to breed in. When the Doctor turns up and gets himself infected with the Swarm's nucleus and is only barely able to keep himself under control, Leela escorts him to the second major solar system setting for this story, a station within the asteroid belt, specifically on asteroid K4067, which doesn't actually exist, by the way. Trust me, I googled it and everything. Called the Center for Alien Biomorphology, or the BiAL Foundation for short. Well, either way, some other infected swarm people turn up to rescue the nucleus, the Doctor gets cured, the nucleus manages to grow to human size and returns to Titan base to continue perfecting its hive. Leela suggests blowing up the base.
I still say we should blow it up.
So the Doctor booby-traps the place with a blaster and a leaky can of oxygen, knowing it'll make for a delightful fireworks display when mixed with Titan's methane atmosphere, and then he takes all the credit.
Methane atmosphere mixed well with oxygen and rum. That was a good idea of mine, K9, to blow it up.
What do you mean it was a good idea of yours? It was my idea.
Part of me wants to be an extremely nitpicky astronomer here. While, yes, methane is indeed a notable component of Titan's overall chemical makeup, its presence in the atmosphere is, at most, a whopping 5%, with the vast overwhelming majority of the gas in the atmosphere, like well over 90%, being comprised of nitrogen, which is not particularly flammable. Methane is, however, far more abundant as a liquid on Titan, as conditions are so cold that far out from the sun that the gas is able to liquefy into lakes and seas. Now, that being said, this story was written a couple of years before any spacecraft had ever visited or made close-up observations of Titan or even Saturn itself. And while methane had been detected on Titan through Earth-based astronomy as far back as the 1940s, nitrogen wasn't detected in its atmosphere until the Voyager 1 flyby of 1980. So, I can let them off the hook here. Same for how Titan apparently has a perfectly crystal clear sky in this story, even though we know that definitely ain't true in reality. Creative liberties were taken in the face of what was then the currently unknown, and that is fine. And as I said, this takes place in the year 5000. Maybe this could be a result of human terraforming for whatever reason. Oh, and also at the beginning, the TARDIS is hanging in the space between Jupiter and Saturn.
Solar system between Jupiter and Saturn.
And the Doctor makes a speech about humanity exploring the asteroid belt. That's pretty. Image of the Fendahl also has a contribution here, in the form of the elusive fifth planet. Upon seeing Fendaline on Earth, the Doctor instantly recognises them as beings from this mysterious planet, which supposedly broke up 12 million years prior to the present day of the story.
If it survived 12 million years, its energy reserves must be enormous.
When the Doctor and Leela go back in time to investigate, the Doctor discovers to his shock that there's no actual record of the fifth planet whatsoever, due to a time loop set up by the Time Lords that encased the site of the planet and erased any evidence of its existence.
All memory of the planet's been erased by a circle of time, making it and its records invisible.
In a truly terrifying display of just how dangerous the Fendahl's life force-eating tendencies are to the rest of the universe, the Time Lords literally broke their rule of non-intervention to destroy a world because the species it harboured were too much of a threat to the rest of creation. Hot damn. Now, the thing is, the story never explicitly states that this is the aborted fifth planet of our solar system per se. For all we know, it could be the fifth planet of the entire universe, or of any other planetary system. However, when the Doctor takes the TARDIS back, he specifically states it being 107 million miles out.
The fifth planet's 107 million miles out and 12 million years back.
Presumably from Earth, which is where they were in the last scene. And as large as that number sounds, yeah, that would still undeniably put it slap bang in our solar system. Our sector of space is larger than you could possibly conceive. But yeah, unfortunately by the time the Time Lords interfered, the Fendahl had already escaped by saving up enough energy to project themselves across space, hence the Gestalt entity being present on Earth. Though the Doctor casually muses that they might have took in Mars on the way through.
The Fendahl had already come here.
Yes. Probably taking in Mars on its way through.
I want to follow up on that. Imagine, Ice Warriors versus Fendahl. Now that's a story idea. Other than that, there's a flippant reference to Venus here too.
You're expecting an attack by little green men from Venus?
I like that line. And now for the Sunmakers. One of the more out there things Doctor Who has done with something in our solar system. So, what if we terraformed Pluto into a plutocracy? Robert Holmes, man. So, humanity was dying as the resources of the Earth were running low, and a greedy Usurian establishment called The Company preyed on their vulnerability by helping them move to other worlds, and then forced high tax rates on them to make a profit. First they'd moved the humans to Mars, but upon exhausting that planet, they then moved them onto Pluto. The Doctor asks about the 4 intervening planets, which...
What about the 4 intervening planets?
No, they weren't considered viable by our engineers.
Like... they're gas giants, you can't exactly terraform those. I mean, maybe they're moons, but the Doctor mentioned the planets themselves, and that's a bit of a dumb moment coming from him. But yeah, a breathable atmosphere and 6 metropolises called Megropolises were established around Pluto, each with their own fusion satellites to make for adequate living conditions on the planet. And yes, I called it a planet. Let's tackle that. Obviously, when this story was written, Pluto was still considered a planet, as the IAU vote to demote it to dwarf status didn't occur until 2006. That said, K9 is in this story. He's a robot databank from the year 5000, and yet he describes it as the 9th planet.
Yes, Pluto.
The 9th planet.
So, in universe, does Pluto regain its full planetary status sometime in the future? K9 also says that Pluto was considered the outermost planet of the solar system until the discovery of Cassius.
Was until the discovery of Cassius believed to be the outermost body in the system.
A world that the TV show never brings up again, or at least I don't think it does. I should probably move on.
From the sun.
Anyway, the Doctor turns up and stops capitalism on Pluto, the end. Actually, that very nearly is the end, because after this point, the 70s kind of stops caring about our solar system? Let's see. The pirate planet features the hollow resource-sucking planet called Zanak, which teleports itself around smaller planets to plunder them, and at one point the powers in charge discover an element they need, which happens to be quartz, on our very own world.
From where? Where? It's the planet Terra, on the star system Sol.
They make the preparations to do a temporal jump, but the Doctor tries materialising the TARDIS in exactly the same place and time that they're aiming for, and after an intense struggle which nearly destroys the TARDIS, the Earth is saved. And in the Stones of Blood, we get a nice shot of the moon, and the Doctor name drops Venus.
All trains at Venus for the Brighton line.
And that is about it for our solar system in 72. Whew! I don't know what it is, but it felt like there was a lot more to unpack there compared to the 60s, and just like the 60s, there was still a lot of stuff that made me do a double take, but, you know, it's all still fun at the end of the day, and, you know, it was fun while it lasted, because, unfortunately, from this point on, Classic Who loses a lot of enthusiasm for our solar system. But that's a story for next time. Anyway, I'm thirsty. I need to call Hugh to get me a drink. Where's my phone? I hate my life.